Alexander Carter's silent counterattack. The battle begins. Alexander Carter set his phone down, his eyes gleaming with determination. The call with his father didn't shock or unsettle him. Instead, it confirmed what he had long anticipated. Robert Carter, CEO of Carter Pharmaceuticals, truly intended to steal the research he had spent 5 years developing. His father had casually announced that the patent had been transferred to Madison, his stepsister, who had no scientific background but held an unaccredited MBA. To Robert, Madison had business acumen and deserved control over the technology more than the very person who had created it. But Robert hadn't anticipated that Alexander had already prepared for this. Over the past year, Alexander had noticed his gradual exclusion from the company. The signs were subtle but undeniable. At first, he was removed from strategic meetings under the pretense that they weren't relevant to scientific research. Then, his access to the company's lab was gradually restricted, forcing him to conduct more of his experiments at his personal lab at Stanford. Not long after, funding for his project was cut, making research progress increasingly difficult. Even more suspicious, Madison began attending discussions about the drug delivery technology he was developing. She took notes and asked questions, but none of them were scientific. Instead, they focused on how to commercialize and control the intellectual property. Sensing something was wrong, Alexander reached out to Sarah Martinez, an old college friend, who was now a corporate and intellectual property lawyer. When he explained the situation, Sarah wasn't surprised. "I've seen this happen too many times," she said. "Family-run companies always think they can control everything, but if you want to keep your work, you need to act fast." A critical move: filing an independent patent. Sarah's advice was clear. He needed legal proof that his innovations did not belong to Carter Pharmaceuticals. Alexander began documenting every stage of his research, saving all emails and correspondence related to budget decisions and lab access. More importantly, he meticulously recorded the exact time and method he made his critical breakthroughs, ensuring they were achieved using his own resources. Sarah advised him to file for an independent patent with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO. If the patent was legally registered under his name before Carter Pharmaceuticals attempted to claim ownership, they wouldn't be able to take it. The patent wouldn't just protect his research, it would also serve as a legal shield against any attempts by his father or Madison to seize control. Alexander worked tirelessly, using every free moment outside his obligations at Carter Pharmaceuticals to prepare his case. He conducted additional experiments at his private lab to ensure all key findings were made independently. He also gathered testimony from independent witnesses to confirm that his research was not influenced by Carter Pharmaceuticals' funding. After months of preparation, Alexander's independent patent was officially received and registered by the USPTO. It became the most powerful weapon in his upcoming battle. Legal preparations: the trap for Robert and Madison. With his patent secured, Alexander and Sarah prepared for the worst-case scenario, Robert making a move to claim the research. They crafted a counterattack plan, calling it Project Shield. They collected all evidence of internal manipulation: company emails, changes in lab access, and meeting records that excluded Alexander. They tracked Madison's actions, documenting every instance where she attempted to learn about the technology without having the necessary expertise. They built a complete legal case, including specific intellectual property laws, ensuring that the moment Carter Pharmaceuticals attempted to claim ownership, they would be stopped immediately. And as expected, Robert made his move. When he confidently announced that the patent had been transferred to Madison, Alexander simply smiled. He didn't need to argue, plead, or fight. Everything was already in place. As soon as the call ended, Alexander texted Sarah, "He did exactly what we expected." Less than an hour later, Sarah had already filed a complaint with the USPTO, notifying them that Carter Pharmaceuticals had attempted to steal a patent that legally did not belong to them. Immediately, USPTO's alert system was triggered, launching an investigation into the legitimacy of the transfer Robert had tried to execute. The moment of truth. The game begins. The next morning, Alexander's inbox was flooded with emails from Carter Pharmaceuticals' legal department. The subject line read, "Request for patent transfer documentation." He didn't open it. Instead, he simply forwarded it to Sarah. A minute later, her reply came through. "They're panicking." Not long after, Madison called him. Her voice was tense, though she tried to sound authoritative. "Alex, we need to discuss the patent transfer. You might not fully understand the business side of things, but we need to ensure this project becomes profitable." Alexander laughed. "Madison, you don't even understand how this technology works." There was silence on the other end before she spoke again, her voice strained. "Dad wants you to cooperate. You know, you could work under my supervision. I can help you manage this project more efficiently." "You mean like how you once suggested creating a mobile app for drug distribution?" Alexander replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Madison, you have no knowledge of this technology. You're just trying to control something you don't understand." Before she could respond, he hung up. A single thought ran through his mind. The real game is only just beginning. Outside his office window, the morning sky was clear. But for Carter Pharmaceuticals, the real storm was approaching. Alexander was ready to watch them scramble when they realized that in this battle, he had already moved several steps ahead. The legal battle and the turning point. Alexander Carter sat in his lab, eyes fixed on his computer screen, as a new email from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO, appeared. Seconds after opening it, a smirk formed on his lips. The trap had been sprung. USPTO had officially notified Carter Pharmaceuticals that they had violated patent transfer procedures and were now under investigation for intellectual property theft. As Alexander read those words, he knew Robert Carter and Madison had cornered themselves. Just a day earlier, his father had called, smugly declaring that the patent had been transferred to Madison. But what Robert didn't know was that Alexander had already filed for an independent patent 3 months earlier, turning his father's actions into a massive legal misstep. Now he didn't have to argue or fight to reclaim what was his. The law would take care of it for him. Outside his window, city lights shimmered in the night. But Alexander had no time to admire the view. He quickly dialed Sarah Martinez. Within seconds, her voice came through the line, "We won." Sarah continued, "I've sent all our documentation to USPTO. Now they have to face a formal investigation. If Carter Pharmaceuticals attempts to commercialize this research without your consent, it will be a direct violation of patent law. And with all the evidence we've gathered, there's no way they can justify their actions." Alexander nodded, confidence burning in his eyes. Every move he had made over the past year had led to this moment. He hadn't rushed or lost his temper. Instead, he had waited patiently for Robert to make a fatal mistake. The corporate showdown. Carter Pharmaceuticals in chaos. The next morning, Alexander walked into Carter Pharmaceuticals' headquarters. On the top floor, in the executive boardroom, Robert Carter, Madison, Deanne, and the company's legal team were gathered. None of them knew that Alexander wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to watch them fall. As he entered, Robert slammed his hand on the table, his face livid. "Alex, what the hell are you doing?" Alexander calmly placed a thick file on the table and spoke in an even tone. "I'm just protecting what's mine. Under intellectual property law, I am the sole owner of this patent, and you, Dad, are trying to steal it." Robert took a deep breath, struggling to contain his anger. But before he could speak, the boardroom doors swung open. 2 representatives from USPTO entered, carrying an official investigation file. Dr. Patricia Wong, one of the representatives, spoke first. Carter Pharmaceuticals submitted a request to transfer Dr. Alexander Carter's patent to Madison Carter. However, our system detected that this patent was independently registered beforehand. We're here to request an official explanation. Madison paled. There must be some mistake. This invention belongs to the company. Sarah, seated beside Alexander, responded coolly. No. According to the documents we provided, all major breakthroughs in this research were made independently, with Dr. Carter's personal resources. A chilling silence filled the room. Alexander turned to his father and smiled. In this game, Dad, you've already lost. Here's the American English translation of your story, The Fall of Carter Pharmaceuticals. Within a week of the boardroom showdown, Carter Pharmaceuticals was under intense scrutiny. The attempt to steal Alexander's research was merely the tip of the iceberg. Regulatory agencies began investigating the company's internal operations, and what they uncovered was far worse. Manipulated clinical trial data to expedite drug approvals, non-compliance with safety protocols, putting patients at severe risk during trials. Financial misconduct, including misallocation of research funds. Amidst the chaos, the board of directors convened an emergency meeting. Soon after, headlines exploded across the media. Robert Carter resigns as CEO of Carter Pharmaceuticals amid legal scandal. Madison didn't fare much better. She was exposed for fabricating her role in the project. During televised interviews, she failed to answer even the most basic questions about the research she claimed credit for. Carter Pharmaceuticals' stock plummeted. Investors pulled out en masse. A company that once dominated the pharmaceutical industry had now become a cautionary tale, a symbol of greed and corruption leading to self-destruction. Alexander's next move, the rise of Carter Biotech. While Carter Pharmaceuticals spiraled into disaster, Alexander embarked on a new chapter. With backing from investors and brilliant scientists, he launched Carter Biotech, a company dedicated to advancing science with integrity, free from corporate greed. One evening, he received a call from a major investor who had been following his work. We want to partner with you, Dr. Carter. It's time to truly change the biotech industry. Alexander gazed out the window of his new lab, sunlight streaming in. He hadn't just reclaimed his research, he had built a future where science came first. And this time, no one could take it from him. The battle against betrayal. The downfall of the schemer. Alexander Carter stood by the window of his modest office, gazing at the gray sky over Stanford's research center. Just months ago, he had been one of the leading scientists at Carter Pharmaceuticals, believing he could continue his groundbreaking research. But everything changed when he discovered the ultimate betrayal. His own father and longtime girlfriend had conspired against him, attempting to steal his life's work. He could never forget the moment Rachel, the woman he had once loved and trusted, casually admitted that she had helped Robert Carter orchestrate the theft of his targeted drug delivery technology. She had stood there, completely unapologetic, shrugging as she said, "This is business, Alex. If you're not ruthless, you'll get left behind." Pain and anger had initially overwhelmed him, but they soon transformed into something sharper, cold, calculated determination. Alexander was no longer the young man seeking his father's approval. He knew that if he wanted to protect his research, he had to turn the tables with strategy and precision. The first step, gathering evidence and legal preparation. The moment he was excluded from key meetings and saw his lab access restricted, Alexander knew he had to act fast. He reached out to Sarah Martinez, a top intellectual property attorney, to begin gathering evidence. It only took Sarah a few hours to find a major flaw in Robert and Rachel's scheme. The patent Robert was trying to steal hadn't been legally secured under Carter Pharmaceuticals, because Alexander had already filed for an independent pen patent months earlier. This meant that any attempt by Robert to claim ownership was legally invalid and could be considered theft. Alexander also backed up all his research data to a secure system, ensuring no one could tamper with or falsify the original findings. He enlisted the help of trusted colleagues to verify that all key breakthroughs had been achieved outside of Carter Pharmaceuticals' jurisdiction, creating an ironclad legal defense. The counterattack, exposing the truth. When Robert Carter announced a press conference to unveil what he claimed was a groundbreaking pharmaceutical breakthrough, Alexander knew it was time to strike back. As soon as Robert stepped onto the stage, Alexander sent a mass email to major news outlets, the USPTO and Carter Pharmaceuticals' board of directors. The email contained proof of his independent patent, internal documents exposing Robert's scheme to exclude him, legal evidence proving Robert had attempted to misappropriate research. At the same time, Sarah Martinez filed an emergency injunction in federal court, prohibiting Carter Pharmaceuticals from using or promoting any information related to Alexander's technology. The fall of Carter Pharmaceuticals. Within 24 hours, the entire situation flipped. The Wall Street Journal, CNBC, and Bloomberg ran breaking news stories exposing Carter Pharmaceuticals for intellectual property theft. Investors dumped their stocks, causing the company's value to plummet by 35% in a single trading day. But the final blow came when the USPTO officially confirmed that the patent belonged to Alexander Carter, rendering Robert's statements false. The company's board of directors could no longer ignore the scandal and called an emergency meeting. Robert Carter's downfall. Rachel's public disgrace. During the internal board meeting, directors grilled Robert Carter about his attempt to steal the patent and the catastrophic damage it had caused. Faced with undeniable evidence, Robert had no defense. Ultimately, the board fired Robert as CEO, ending his 30-year reign over Carter Pharmaceuticals. Rachel wasn't spared either. As journalists dug deeper, they uncovered that she had falsified credentials to gain authority over the research project. Once the truth surfaced, she was immediately fired and publicly shamed. Alexander launches Carter Biotech, a new beginning. While Carter Pharmaceuticals crumbled, Alexander had already set a new course. With funding from investors who believed in his work, he founded Carter Biotech, a company dedicated to scientific integrity and real innovation. Within months, Carter Biotech secured contracts with major hospitals and research institutions, bringing his targeted drug delivery technology into clinical trials. The final meeting, Robert's apology. A few weeks after Carter Pharmaceuticals' public downfall, Alexander received an unexpected call. "Can we talk?" Robert's voice was uncharacteristically subdued. Alexander agreed to meet him at a small cafe outside the city. When he arrived, he saw that Robert looked tired, older, and defeated. The once proud businessman was now just a shadow of his former self. "You won," Robert admitted, taking a sip of coffee. "Carter Pharmaceuticals will never recover from this." Alexander remained silent. There was nothing to say. "I was wrong," Robert continued. "I thought I could control everything, but I never expected you to outmaneuver me." Alexander met his father's gaze. "You didn't lose because I was smarter. You lost because you treated science like a business transaction. And because you forgot, I no longer need your approval." Robert nodded slowly, then stood up to leave. Before walking away, he hesitated for a moment. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said quietly. Alexander didn't respond. He simply watched the morning sunlight spill across the cafe's windows. He had reclaimed what was his. But more importantly, he had built a future that no one could take away from him. Betrayal. Within the family. A battle for justice. Alexander Carter stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, staring at the shimmering city lights. This was the city where he had built his career, where he had poured his heart and soul into researching a technology that could revolutionize biotechnology. And yet, just when he thought he had reached the pinnacle of success, His own family, the people he trusted the most, had betrayed him in the cruelest way possible. From heir to outcast. His father, Robert Carter, had once been a respected leader in the pharmaceutical industry. He had co-founded Carter Pharmaceuticals alongside Alexander's mother before she passed away from cancer. When she died, Alexander vowed to continue her legacy, dedicating his life to developing targeted drug delivery technology, a breakthrough that could help cancer patients avoid the devastating side effects of chemotherapy. But he never expected that the project he had worked so hard to create would become a prize his own family sought to steal. And now, it was time to fight back. Here is the American English translation of your story, Turning the Tables. What Robert and Ryan didn't know was that Alexander had already foreseen their scheme. The moment he noticed his authority being diminished, he secretly filed for an independent patent and reached out to Sarah Martinez, an intellectual property attorney. "Your father doesn't have the right to transfer something he doesn't own," Sarah told him when they met at her law office. "This patent is registered under your name. If Carter Pharmaceuticals tries to claim it, they'll be in serious trouble." The very next day, Sarah filed a formal complaint with the USPTO, officially challenging Carter Pharmaceuticals. At the same time, Alexander reached out to several investors who had previously expressed interest in his work, proposing the idea of launching his own biotech company. Within weeks, Carter Biotech was born, dedicated to continuing his research and commercializing the targeted drug delivery system without Carter Pharmaceuticals. The fall of Carter Pharmaceuticals. As soon as the USPTO announced an investigation into the attempted patent theft, Carter Pharmaceuticals' stock price plummeted. The board of directors panicked, forcing Robert Carter to make a public statement. But the situation only worsened when investors realized Carter Pharmaceuticals no longer held the rights to its most valuable patent. Within a month, Robert Carter was forced to resign, and Ryan was fired after being exposed for misappropriating internal investment funds. Alexander's victory. As news of Carter Pharmaceuticals' downfall spread, Alexander simply sat in his new office, staring at the folder labeled Carter Biotech. He hadn't just reclaimed his research, he had proven that he didn't need Carter Pharmaceuticals to succeed. A message popped up from Sarah. "The FDA has officially approved clinical trials for your technology. We're about to change the biotech industry." Alexander smiled. He didn't need revenge. His success was the ultimate revenge. Betrayal in the inherited family. The fight for justice. The sunset painted the sky in fiery hues as Sophia Carter sat in her office, her eyes locked onto her computer screen. A new email notification had appeared. An official statement from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO. It confirmed that she was no longer the legal owner of her mother's inheritance. For a moment, her world crumbled. Then, the shock turned into cold, burning rage. She had expected this to happen, but she still hadn't imagined that her stepmother, Evelyn, would go this far. The woman hadn't just stolen her mother's inheritance. She had transferred everything to Ryan, her own son, a man who had never lifted a finger to earn it. Sophia clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a war. And she was ready to fight. Evelyn's arrival and the scheme to take over Sophia had never forgotten the day her father introduced Evelyn to the family, just a few months after her mother's death. Evelyn arrived with an air of elegance, sharp eyes, and a calculated smile. At the time, Sophia was too young to understand that this woman hadn't just come to become her father's wife. She had come to seize control of everything that belonged to her mother. At first, Evelyn played the role of a devoted wife and caring stepmother. But over time, her true nature emerged. She systematically removed Sophia from every important decision in the company, replaced loyal employees with her own people, and manipulated Sophia's father into trusting her completely. When Sophia's father suddenly passed away from a heart attack, Evelyn seized complete control of Carter Industries. Not long after, she declared that Sophia was unfit to run the company and transferred all authority to Ryan. The first counterattack, preparing to take back what was hers. Sophia could have lost everything if she hadn't prepared in advance. From the moment Evelyn started tightening her grip on the family's finances, Sophia had secretly gathered evidence of her stepmother's shady dealings. She hired Sarah Martinez, one of the best attorneys specializing in intellectual property and financial law, to review her mother's inheritance contracts. And Sarah found a crucial loophole. Evelyn couldn't legally transfer all assets without Sophia's authorized signature. "We can take this to court," Sarah said as they sat in her law office. "But if we want to win, we need a solid strategy. Evelyn isn't someone who goes down easily." Sophia's eyes hardened. "Then we'll show her that she's not the only one who knows how to play power games." The first blow. Bringing Evelyn to light, Sophia filed a lawsuit against Evelyn and Ryan, demanding a full investigation into the asset transfer. At the same time, she reached out to major shareholders in the company, exposing how Evelyn had been manipulating Carter Industries. As news of the lawsuit spread, media outlets started questioning the legitimacy of Evelyn and Ryan's takeover. Newspaper articles surfaced, highlighting concerns about the company's transparency. Backed into a corner, Evelyn tried to silence the rumors, but the more she resisted, the more suspicious people became. The final showdown. Turning the tables. On the day of the trial, Sophia walked into the courtroom with unshakable confidence. Across the aisle sat Evelyn and Ryan, both looking composed, but Sophia knew they were standing on the edge of ruin. When the judge asked both parties to present their evidence, Sophia and Sarah unveiled everything, proving that Evelyn had exploited legal loopholes to steal the inheritance. Then came the final blow. Sarah revealed evidence that Evelyn had forged Sophia's signature on the transfer documents. The courtroom erupted. Evelyn turned pale, her hands trembling. Her lawyer tried to argue, but the evidence was undeniable. In the end, the judge ruled in Sophia's favor, declaring her the rightful heir to the inheritance and ordering Evelyn's arrest for fraud. Ryan didn't escape either. He was forced to resign from Carter Industries and now faced financial misconduct charges. Sophia's new beginning. After the trial, Sophia stepped out of the courthouse, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She had won the battle against the betrayers. And now, she could lead Carter Industries the way it was meant to be, honoring her mother's legacy. But Sophia wasn't stopping there. She announced a complete overhaul of Carter Industries, vowing to restore the company's reputation and focus on true scientific innovation, not corporate greed. Weeks later, as she stood in the company's main conference room, she saw the relieved and trusting smiles of her employees, people who had been deceived by Evelyn and Ryan for years. A new email arrived from Sarah. "Congratulations, Evelyn has been officially convicted. Carter Industries is yours." Sophia smiled, taking a deep breath. The war was over, but her journey was just beginning. Here is the American English translation of your story. Signs of a sinister plot. It all began when Olivia noticed that every time she had dinner at home, she would feel dizzy and nauseous. At first, she thought it was due to exhaustion from work, but when she ate elsewhere, the symptoms never appeared. After observing for a while, Olivia realized that Margaret, her mother-in-law, was always the one preparing her meals. Margaret always acted caring and thoughtful, but she was also insistent that Olivia drink a special herbal tea she prepared. Olivia's suspicion grew. Eventually, she decided to secretly send a sample of the tea for testing. When the results came back, a chill ran down her spine. The tea contained small traces of arsenic, a slow-acting poison that could cause gradual weakness without immediate detection. She no longer had any doubts. Margaret was poisoning her. But the most painful betrayal wasn't her mother-in-law's cruelty. it was Steve's indifference. When Olivia tried to tell her husband about what she had discovered, he simply laughed dismissively. "You're just overreacting, Olivia. My mother would never do something like that." That was when she realized Steve was never going to be on her side. He was either too weak or too dependent on his mother to see the truth. And Olivia knew she couldn't endure this any longer. Planning the counterattack, Olivia didn't argue further. She understood now, no one in this family was going to protect her. If she wanted to escape this nightmare, she would have to save herself. Her first step was to gather evidence. She secretly installed hidden cameras in the kitchen and dining room, recording Margaret's actions. She also collected samples of the tea, pills, and anything else Margaret gave her, sending them to a private lab for analysis. Next, she needed a trustworthy ally, and that person was Sarah Martinez, a well-known civil and financial crime attorney. When Olivia presented her findings, Sarah simply nodded and said in a calm, determined voice, "We're going to make her pay." The confrontation, exposing the truth. 1 week later, Olivia walked into the living room where Margaret sat comfortably, sipping her tea. But this time, Olivia wasn't the same weak woman she once was. She stared directly into Margaret's eyes, placed a folder of lab reports on the table, and spoke slowly and clearly. "I know what you did." Margaret paused for a brief second. Then she laughed. "What are you talking about, Olivia? Are you imagining things again?" Olivia didn't blink. She took out a USB drive and played the footage from the hidden camera. On the screen, Margaret could be seen secretly pouring a white powder into Olivia's tea. Margaret's face turned pale. She stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but before she could, the front door swung open. Police officers stepped inside. "Margaret Parker, you are under arrest for attempted poisoning." Margaret screamed and struggled, but it was too late. The collapse of a toxic family. After her mother-in-law's arrest, Steve begged Olivia for forgiveness. But Olivia only looked at him coldly. "You didn't protect me when I needed you the most. Now I don't need you anymore." The next day, she filed for divorce and left the house that had become her prison. Months later, Olivia stood in front of her new apartment, a new life, free from toxicity and manipulation. As she opened the door, she smiled for the first time in a long time. She had won. And this time, no one could control her life ever again. When family becomes the betrayer, the fight for justice. Jessica sat quietly in her usual coffee shop, her hands wrapped tightly around her warm cup, as if it were the only thing keeping her calm. Outside the window, the city lights twinkled, but she no longer saw their beauty. All she could hear was her mother's voice from their last phone call. "We've decided to sell the house. The family needs the money, and this is the best decision for everyone." Everyone. A word Jessica had heard all her life, but everyone had never included her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to control the rage bubbling inside her. The house they were talking about was her house. The home she had been paying the mortgage for, while her parents and younger brother lived comfortably without contributing anything. And now, they wanted to sell it, without even asking her. The betrayed and the awakening. Jessica had never been the type to get angry easily. She had always believed in family loyalty. She worked tirelessly, saved every penny, and when her family faced financial difficulties, she didn't hesitate to use her own money to pay off their mortgage. At first, she thought it was the right thing to do. After all, family helps each other. But over time, she realized she was the only one making an effort. Her parents never planned to pay her back. Instead, they kept spending recklessly on unnecessary luxuries while constantly asking for more money. Her younger brother, Ethan, didn't care either. He spent his days playing video games and partying, and whenever she suggested he find a stable job, he just laughed and said, "You're acting like a stingy old woman. Family is about sharing, right?" "Sharing?" Jessica laughed bitterly. She had shared everything with them. but they had never shared anything with her. And now, they were trying to sell the house she had paid for, without even telling her. The plan to take back what was hers. Jessica knew she couldn't continue living like this. She had to act, and she had already been preparing for a long time. 1 year ago, when she realized that her family would never repay her, she secretly purchased the house through an investment company under her own name, JSC Holdings. This meant that not only had she paid off the mortgage, but she was also the legal owner of the house. The paperwork was signed and sealed, but her family had no idea. They still thought the house belonged to them. They still thought they could sell it and keep all the money. But they had made a serious mistake. The confrontation, the betrayer's downfall. The next day, Jessica returned home. Her mother was sitting on the couch, Ethan lounging with his phone, acting as if nothing had happened. "Oh, you're home," her mother said casually, as if they hadn't just betrayed her. "We need to talk." Jessica sat down calmly, her eyes drifting to the sale contract sitting on the table. "I already know," she said quietly. Her mother smiled, assuming Jessica would obediently agree. "I knew you'd understand. The family needs this money to start fresh, and of course, you can still live here for a while, if you're willing to contribute a little." Jessica laughed, a cold, chilling laugh. "Funny," she said, picking up the contract, "because you don't have the right to sell this house." The room froze. Her mother's face twisted in confusion. "What do you mean?" Jessica placed another document on the table, the legal proof that she was the rightful owner of the house. Her mother turned pale. Ethan jumped up, grabbed the papers, scanned them, then looked at his mother in panic. "This can't be real. What the hell did you do?" Ethan hissed. Jessica folded her arms, her voice ice cold. "I protected what was mine from people who only knew how to take. And this time, they had lost the value of self-respect and independent thinking." In life, education is not just limited to books. It includes lessons on how to live, think, and protect oneself. More importantly, for future generations, the most valuable inheritance we can pass down is not just material wealth, but the awareness of self-worth and the responsibility for one's own life. One of the most common mistakes in families is excessive indulgence, or the mindset of unconditional sacrifice. When parents or grandparents give too much without setting boundaries, children may start to take that help for granted instead of appreciating it and learning self-reliance. Proper education is not about providing everything for children, but rather teaching them how to stand on their own, how to value what they have, and how to take responsibility for their own lives. The most important lesson we can teach the next generation is this: no one is obligated to sacrifice themselves for others, and no one has the right to take advantage of another's kindness. When a child learns that every individual has their own value and that everyone deserves respect, they will grow up to be independent, responsible, and truly compassionate, rather than someone who only knows how to demand from others. Thus, education is not just about imparting knowledge, but also about guiding others on how to live, how to love, and how to protect themselves in a world full of temptations and manipulations. Have you ever felt abandoned or unimportant in your family? What does that feel like? From a young age, Deborah clearly felt that she was never a priority in her parents' eyes. While she couldn't say she had a miserable childhood, the constant comparison to her younger sister, Amanda, always made her feel left out. Everything started to change when Amanda was born earlier than expected, a sudden event that completely disrupted the family's life. Their parents, especially their mother, quickly poured all their attention into the fragile newborn, and from that moment on, Deborah was gradually pushed to the sidelines. Deborah vividly remembers the night her father rushed out of the house to get to the hospital while she was left behind with Aunt Jennifer. At the time, she didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation, only that everyone was tense and worried. When Amanda survived but required special care, their home transformed into a miniature hospital. Her mother obsessively sanitized everything, maintaining an almost clinical level of cleanliness. What hurt Deborah the most was that whenever she had a mild cold or even just a small cough, her mother wouldn't care about how she was feeling, but would immediately send her away. "Deborah, did you just cough? We can't take any risks. Pack your things, I'll take you to Grandma's for a few days." At first, Deborah thought staying with her grandmother or Aunt Jennifer was a little adventure, but over time, she realized it wasn't a fun vacation. It was a temporary exile. She was no longer seen as an essential part of the family, but rather as a potential health risk to Amanda. Meanwhile, Amanda grew up receiving their parents' undivided attention. Every one of her needs was met instantly, and this didn't change even after she became healthy and no longer needed special care. Deborah tried to regain her parents' attention by becoming the perfect child. She studied hard, earned top grades, joined school clubs, and even won a science competition. But every time she excitedly shared her achievements with her parents, their reactions were indifferent. She will never forget the day she proudly brought home her championship trophy from the science fair. Instead of feeling proud or offering praise, her mother simply sighed and said, "Okay, but did you wash your hands? Amanda has a slight cold, and I don't want you bringing in any germs." As she grew older, Deborah saw the unfairness more clearly. If Amanda experienced even the smallest inconvenience, their parents would drop everything to comfort her. Once, Deborah's science teacher invited her parents for a meeting to discuss her potential for a full scholarship. But right at that moment, Amanda called, crying because she had lost her favorite pen. Her parents immediately rushed out to find another pen for Amanda, abandoning the important conversation about their eldest daughter's future. After that incident, they never attended any of Deborah's school events again. The ultimate proof of favoritism came when Deborah won the state debate championship, a rare and prestigious achievement for a student. But instead of proudly displaying the trophy, her mother quietly stashed it away in a drawer, saying, "Amanda doesn't like seeing other people's awards." Over time, Deborah realized that no matter what she accomplished, it would never be enough to make her parents proud. Amanda was always the center of their world, while Deborah remained just a shadow beside her sister. By the time she reached adulthood, Deborah had come to terms with the fact that there was no way to win the love and attention she had always craved from her parents. They had formed a habit of putting Amanda first, and no matter what Deborah did, she could never change the reality that, in their eyes, she would always be less important. Unrecognized effort. Deborah's story. Deborah was never a rebellious child. She didn't seek attention by causing trouble or defying her parents. Instead, she tried to earn their recognition by becoming the perfect child. She believed that if she excelled in school, worked hard, and achieved great things, her parents would finally see her, love her, and be proud of her. Just like they always were with Amanda. But that belief quickly crumbled when she realized that, in her parents' eyes, nothing could ever be more important than her younger sister. From elementary school, Deborah showed exceptional talent. She earned top grades, received praise from teachers, and consistently ranked at the top of her class. But every time she brought home her report card, her parents' reaction was nothing more than a brief nod before they returned to their primary concern: Amanda's health. She vividly remembers one time when she excitedly told her mother that she had been chosen as the leader of her school's science project. Instead of congratulating her, her mother simply asked, "Did you touch anything at the hospital? Amanda is feeling a bit weak, and I don't want you bringing any germs home." Despite being overlooked, Deborah didn't give up. In high school, she joined the debate team, the science club, and various extracurricular activities. She spent countless hours studying, honing her skills, and proving that she, too, deserved attention. When she won first place in a statewide science competition, she eagerly brought her trophy home to show her mother. But instead of hugging her and celebrating, her mother simply sighed and said, "That's great, honey, but did you wash your hands? Amanda had a cold this morning." At that moment, Deborah understood that nothing she did would ever be enough to capture her parents' attention. Amanda was the center of their world, the child who needed to be protected, while Deborah was merely an afterthought. But the breaking point came during her senior year of high school. One day, her science teacher called her parents to inform them that Deborah had a strong chance of earning a full-ride scholarship if she maintained her outstanding performance. The teacher requested a meeting to discuss how to support Deborah's path to securing this opportunity. It was a pivotal moment, a chance to finally gain their recognition. But just then, her mother's phone rang. It was Amanda. "I can't find my favorite pen. I can't do my homework without it." Amanda sobbed over the phone. Without a second thought, Deborah's parents stood up and left, abandoning the discussion about their eldest daughter's future to rush home and help Amanda find a pen. They never returned to the meeting, and from that day on, they never attended any of Deborah's school events again. She tried to convince herself that if she just kept pushing forward, one day her parents would realize her worth. But the last time she tried, she received the most painful blow yet. When she won the state championship in debate, Deborah thought, "This time, they will be proud of me." This was not just any achievement. She was a state champion, beating dozens of competitors from prestigious schools. But instead of displaying the trophy on a shelf like most families would, her mother quietly stashed it away in a drawer. "Amanda doesn't like seeing other people's awards," she explained, as if that was a perfectly reasonable excuse for hiding Deborah's accomplishments. Deborah couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't just indifference anymore. This was a deliberate erasure of everything she had worked for, just to protect Amanda's feelings. For the first time, Deborah felt like she no longer belonged in this family. She poured all her energy into preparing for college, not just to escape Amanda's shadow, but to leave her past behind. She earned a full scholarship to a state university, covering both tuition and living expenses. No one in her family congratulated her. When she came home to share the news, Amanda didn't even look up from her phone and muttered, "Finally, you're leaving. I'm turning your room into a gaming space." No words of encouragement, no celebration, just indifference. From that moment on, Deborah began counting down the days until she could leave and start a new life. One where she no longer had to fight for recognition. After leaving home for college, Deborah finally had the chance to live life on her own terms. No longer competing for her parents' approval, she focused entirely on her studies and planning for her future. She knew that if she wanted a life different from the one she had in her family, she had to create it for herself. Without any financial support from her parents, she refused to let that hold her back. She majored in business administration, sought out job opportunities, and managed her money carefully. Thanks to her full-ride scholarship, she didn't have to worry about tuition, but she still needed to cover her living expenses. While other students spent money on shopping and social outings, Deborah saved every penny, telling herself that one day she would build a life that no one could take away from her. After graduation, she quickly landed a management position at Thompson & Company. The starting salary wasn't high, but to her, having a stable job and financial independence was already a huge success. She rented a small apartment, relishing the freedom she had never experienced while living with her family. But rather than settling for an ordinary life, she kept asking herself, "How can I make my money work for me?" One day, while browsing online, she came across an ad for a finance course. Learn how to make your money work for you instead of working for money. Normally, she would have scrolled past, but this time she paused. The course had a tuition fee, and enrolling would mean making serious sacrifices. It meant eating instant noodles for weeks, skipping nights out with coworkers, and living as frugally as possible. But she decided to invest in herself. The instructor, Matthew, helped her understand the stock market, risk management, and long-term investment strategies. At first, she only invested a few $100s in tech stocks, watching every small market fluctuation. When her initial investment grew significantly, she dove deeper, reading books, following financial news, and learning how to diversify her portfolio. Her biggest breakthrough came when she invested in a small AI company that no one was paying attention to. Within 3 months, her $375 turned into $3,500. A biotech startup also tripled her initial investment. That was when she realized this was the path she wanted to take. Gradually, her investment income surpassed her monthly salary. She no longer relied on her corporate job, but she kept it to avoid raising suspicion from her family. Every morning, as she sat at her desk, she no longer cared about long meetings or company policies. She was simply waiting for the right moment to walk away from the office life. And finally, that day arrived. Deborah's family only cares about her money. Even after achieving financial success and becoming fully independent, Deborah continued her habit of attending family dinners every Saturday. Perhaps it was routine, or maybe it was a faint hope that one day her parents would genuinely care about her, not just as a financial provider. But every time, the dinners revolved around Amanda, her plans, her needs, and the endless praise about her bright future. When Amanda was accepted into Carleton University, an expensive private school, their mother proudly bragged about it, but it was always followed by a sigh about the high tuition and living costs. "We had to take out loans, but Amanda deserves the best," their mother said, her voice filled with pride. Meanwhile, Deborah remembered that when she had earned a full-ride scholarship to college, no one in the family had congratulated her or even cared. For the first time, Deborah asked herself, if I stopped contributing financially, would they even want me at these dinners? Then one day, the answer became painfully clear. That evening, when Deborah arrived at her parents' house, she found her mother sitting in front of a pile of bills, looking visibly distressed. "The property taxes have gone up again," her father muttered. "With Amanda's tuition and living expenses, we're really struggling." Seeing this, Deborah felt conflicted. A part of her still felt responsible for helping her parents, even though they had never truly cared about her the way they cared about Amanda. In the end, she decided to send $2,000 a month to her parents to help them with expenses. When her mother received the news, she hugged Deborah for the first time in years and said, "You're a good daughter, Deborah. I'm really grateful for you." It was the first time her mother had ever given her a compliment. But the joy didn't last long. That night, as she walked past the kitchen, Deborah overheard her parents talking. "We should set aside at least $450 for Amanda," her mother whispered. "She feels left out because her friends have designer handbags." "Yes, poor thing," her father agreed. "We can't let her fall behind at Carleton. Maybe we should take a little extra from what Deborah sends us." Deborah froze. She had hoped that her financial help would make her parents appreciate her more, but the reality was different. They saw her only as a source of money to continue spoiling Amanda. No one wondered how hard she had worked to earn that money. No one cared about her life, as long as she kept sending the checks. That night, for the first time, Deborah realized she was not truly an important member of this family, at least not beyond her financial contributions. This year's Thanksgiving was no different from previous years. Her mother, despite complaining about back pain, insisted on hosting dinner for over 20 guests. When Deborah suggested ordering catering from a high-end restaurant, her mother eagerly agreed and spent the entire week boasting to relatives about Deborah's filial piety. But not everyone was pleased. Amanda, clearly annoyed, kept making passive-aggressive comments about how store-bought food can't compare to homemade meals. Deborah ignored her, as always. She wasn't here to argue. Dinner went as usual. Her parents spent the entire time talking about Amanda, her recent graduation, her upcoming job, and their financial struggles in paying off her student loans. Deborah quietly ate, as she had done for years, knowing no one would ask about her life. But this time, Amanda seemed bothered by her silence. Suddenly, she stood up, walked out of the room, and returned with Deborah's laptop in her hands. "Let's all find out just how much money Deborah really has," Amanda announced with a smug grin, clearly expecting to embarrass her sister. Before Deborah could stop her, Amanda turned the screen toward everyone. Her banking app was still open, displaying a $10 million account balance. The room fell into absolute silence. Amanda's smug expression faded, her eyes widening in shock at the number on the screen. Her mother was the first to break the silence. $10 million, she shrieked, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. No one reacted with pride or happiness. No one asked how Deborah had achieved such success. They were just angry. "Did you ever think about your family, Deborah?" her father snapped. We've been struggling financially for years, and you've been sitting on $10 million without helping us more? Deborah stared at her parents, unable to believe what she was hearing. They truly believed she had an obligation to support them, despite the fact that she had already been sending them money every month for years. I've been sending you $2,000 a month for years, and now you're telling me I haven't helped at all? Deborah replied coldly. Her mother waved a hand dismissively. $3,500 a month is nothing. With that amount of money, you could have given us at least $10,000. Deborah let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. For what? She asked. So you can keep buying luxury items for Amanda so she can have Gucci bags and live like a princess while I work tirelessly to earn this money? Amanda finally spoke, her voice dripping with resentment. You're so selfish, Deborah. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're just hoarding money to make me suffer. Deborah couldn't help but laugh at her sister's audacity. Jealous of you? She raised an eyebrow. Amanda, I worked tirelessly, studied, invested, and took risks. And you? You've been spoiled your entire life, sheltered by our parents, and now that you're struggling, you're blaming me? The room descends into chaos. Her parents shouted, blaming her for not understanding family responsibility, while the relatives exchanged awkward glances, unsure whose side to take. Deborah had had enough. She stood up and looked at her parents one last time. I am no longer your financial provider. I will not send you another cent, and don't contact me again. With that, she walked away, leaving her family in stunned silence and outrage. As Deborah stepped out of her parents' house, after Thanksgiving dinner, a whirlwind of emotions swirled inside her. She hadn't expected gratitude or recognition when they discovered her wealth. But she never imagined they would react with such cruelty and entitlement. The moment she sat in her car, her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from her mother, father, and Amanda. You are unbelievable. How could you abandon your family in their time of need? Amanda is your sister. She needs your help. You're such an ungrateful daughter. You're selfish, hoarding all your money and not caring about anyone else. Deborah switched off her phone, unwilling to waste another second on their unreasonable accusations. She drove home to her apartment, where she could finally enjoy peace, free from manipulation and exploitation. But her family wasn't done with her yet. Within 2 days, her mother took to social media, fabricating a tearful story, portraying Deborah as a heartless daughter who had abandoned her struggling parents and needy younger sister, despite being wealthy. Strangers, distant relatives, and even former acquaintances flooded the comments with judgment. How could you turn your back on your parents after everything they sacrificed for you? Money has changed you, Deborah. You've become so cold-hearted. If I had $10 million, I would help my family without a second thought. Reading these comments, Deborah felt more amused than angry. None of these people knew the truth, that she had supported her parents for years and that they had used her money to spoil Amanda. At that moment, she knew she had to take decisive action. She opened her banking app and immediately canceled the $2,000 monthly allowance she had been sending her parents for years. Then, she sent one final message to her mother. I have stopped all financial support. From now on, I am no longer this family's ATM. Do not contact me again. Within seconds, her phone exploded with calls from her parents. But Deborah no longer cared. The next day, she went to the building manager and provided a list of people to be banned from her apartment. Her parents and Amanda. She wanted no further confrontations. This wasn't running away. It was freedom. A few days later, her parents and Amanda showed up at her building, demanding to see her. They caused a scene with the receptionist, yelling and insisting they had a right to talk to their daughter. When security blocked their entry, they even threatened to call the police. But no one in the building cared about their ridiculous tantrum. That night, Deborah sat down with her laptop and began browsing homes in a different state. Maybe it was time for a fresh start, somewhere they could never find her. As she clicked on a cozy house in a faraway city, she felt no sadness, no regret. For the first time in her life, she was truly free. The hard truth about family and money. Deborah had spent her entire life trying to be the perfect daughter, the good sister, someone her family could be proud of. But in the end, she realized nothing she did was ever enough. In her parents' eyes, she had only one value: money. When they discovered she had $10 million, they weren't proud. They weren't happy for her. They were angry, because she hadn't given them more. After cutting ties, Deborah's life became lighter. No more family dinners where she was ignored. No more texts demanding money. No more exhausting efforts to prove her worth. But even though she blocked them, her family kept trying to manipulate her in other ways. Her mother continued posting online, portraying herself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter. She wrote about how they were struggling with bills, how Amanda was drowning in student loans,